Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I'm, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for technical sales professionals and technical sales leaders. And folks, these are live conversations. If you've attended any one of these, you know, as I like to say, these conversations are by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And I am delighted to welcome this week's guest. Unlike many of the guests that I've had on the show, she's actually someone that I've had the opportunity to meet in person before we had the conversation. She and I attended an event here in the DC area not too long ago. We had the fortunate opportunity to sit across from one another at the dinner table. And by the time the night ended, I pulled her aside and said, would you consider being on my little LinkedIn Live show? Because you've got a great personality. She's got great insights. And I just loved having a conversation. Her name is Vinaya Springer, as you can see on the board there. She is a senior sales engineering leader in a global enterprise division with a company that all of you, I'm sure, are very well familiar with. We're going to be talking about the generation gap, if I can use that term, and sort of the multi-generational workforce and whatever else we happen to stumble upon today. Vinaya, so good to see you again. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I mean, Chris, you are phenomenal in regards to your opening. Like, I need to take you on the road with me in regards to intros, but I am blessed and highly favored to be able to be in your presence and join this live session with you, sir. Thank you for the invite.
So good to see you again. And I told you I was going to do this, and I'm going to do this right out of the gate. In a minute, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself a little bit more broadly. But folks, the first time she and I spoke on Zoom, this was the view that I saw. And I told her, we're going to start up close. But I love what you have in the background. So let's first start with the sneakers. When we all introduced ourselves, we had to share an interesting fact about ourselves. So you shared something about the sneakers. And then I love the words. But let's start with the sneakers first. Tell our audience a little bit about your sneaker fascination.
Yeah, so interesting enough, every time I have to think about, well, what's one fascinating insight about you, Vinaya, outside of your 9 to 5? I always think about a couple of things. What am I passionate around? I'm passionate around mentoring and coaching. Okay, great. I'm passionate around, long walks on the beach. Okay, great, right? I'm passionate around traveling and eating and a foodie. But I am a sneakerhead, and for those of you out there that know what that means, I collect sneakers. I grew up playing basketball. I grew up, fascinated by the likes of Michael Jordan, right? Kobe Bryant, people of such. And I always wanted their sneakers. And I remember growing up, good grades for me equated to a sneaker.
I
That was
love
it.
that.
I didn't want money. I didn't want anything else besides mom and dad. If I could just get one thing this entire year, I just want a pair of sneakers. And so that became a thing, right? And so as I grew up and graduated and was able to get a paying job to be able to support such, I continued sneaker collecting. And so I have a whole a sneaker room that right now encompasses around 400 sneakers. At one period of time, it was 500. And interesting enough, fun fact, I sold half my collection and used that to put a down payment on my house that I live in today.
Wow.
So there are actually some goodness to it. But every single week I feature a new sneaker, and I call it Shoe of the Week. And I actually got to do that to
what
go
do we
with
have?
it.
What do we have today? What did you choose for this week?
So this week is the Air Jordan 1 85 highs. They actually just came out recently. They did not come out online. They actually came out in store. And this is an ode to the original Air Jordan 1. So if you are Jordan fans out there, you know the history of the band ones. These are the band ones for Nike's take on it in 2025. What you see on the left side of me, right side of you, is an illuminated sign that I tend to hook up every now and then. It's another Jordan 1 symbol that I was blessed as a Christmas gift a couple of years ago. So yeah, this is me just demonstrating and showing to the world, that you can show up as yourself and be authentic and bring something different to the table when we're having these video calls.
I absolutely love that. And let's take an opportunity to turn that into a lesson for anybody who might be listening. I think
Yes,
the more we can show our personality and let our personality come through a little bit through the lens of a camera, as I like to say, and be your authentic self. And what better way to do that than displaying one of your favorite things behind you? So as a
exactly.
by the way, I'm thinking back. I'm thinking back to the commercials, and I don't who was the guy who was in some of the old Jordan commercials where he was like, "It's got to be the shoes. It's got to be the shoes."
Spike.
Who what?
Spike.
Spike. Of course, yes, Spike. Of course. A lot. A lot. I mean, I haven't thought about that probably in 30 years.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's interesting when they came out with when they came out with these, they actually revisited the old Jordan 1 commercials, and they had Spike in there and a couple of others. So yeah, it was a remembering of what it was while also marrying that, which is interesting enough, our conversation for today with what's current in today's society and how we're going about such.
I love it. And you know what? You and I could probably spend an hour talking about the good old days, like the 90s, with Jordan and Magic and Bird and all that. But we will digress too far. So we're gonna stay a little bit focused, although maybe there's a little bit of a generation conversation
Yeah.
there. I do before we zoom back in, so people have a better look at both of us. I do want to touch on the four other signs that you have on the wall there because I love those: mindset, hustle, greatness, and success.
Yep.
Do you mind talking a little bit about each one of those words? Why were those the words that inspired you to hang on the wall?
Yeah, so the engineer in me, the science and math and technologist in me, has always been thrilled and fascinated by the periodic table, right?
Interesting.
How we came about with the elements, how we numbered those elements, what goes into those elements, and how those elements combine create different types of natural gases and things of that nature, right? And
Hmm.
so me and you were talking about this right before we launched this session in regards to just how we go about our day to day, how we're operating in our day to day, what makes us, what breaks us, what gives us
Hmm.
passion, and mindfulness, hustle, success. There's the word legacy that's above my head that you can't see as well. Are all elements, if you will, that make up my mindset and how I approach each day. And as
Hmm.
a leader and leading in today's society, these are the 4 to 5 things I'm continuously reminded of when I'm leading my teams, when I'm mentoring, when I'm coaching, when I'm joining sessions like this, of just being mindful of how we're showing up. Just thinking about what it is to hustle, but hustle means something different for every single person. What does success look like? Success isn't just always about the money. It isn't
Hmm.
always about just a paycheck. It's about what we're bringing to the table, right? Gratefulness. I show up every day highly favored and blessed just to be able to be here because I understand that today is not promised and neither is tomorrow. So that's exactly what happened. And when you bring the whole entire story together, interesting enough, Chris, this happened during the pandemic. Me and you were talking about this just a couple of minutes ago. During the pandemic, that was literally the first time where I was stationary at my house Monday through Friday, sun up to sundown.
It's tough, wasn't it?
Okay. And being in this same office that I had not really put any thought into. I had a lamp, I had a desk, I had a laptop, I had a video unit. I had the essentials that were needed to be able to quote unquote work from home for a couple hours, and that was good. I was always in a hybrid role, and I'm still in a hybrid role. So I travel, I can go into the office. I have different opportunities to be able to engage with customers and partners in my team. So when the pandemic happened and you take someone who is an outgoing, in-person, passionate individual and have them working from home 24/7, mentally that took a toll. And I
Mm.
remember taking off from work for Christmas. We had a week off from work. I ended up taking off 2 weeks, and really wanted to figure out how can I uplift my mental state, right? What can I
Mhm.
do different? And it started with my office. I had got the coaching and advice from someone that's on my board of directors in regards to, hey, you might want to just change up something. even if it's just getting a standing desk, that changes up the monotony and changes up your routine. Hey, uh, you don't always have to have the background of everybody else. That's never been your spiel. That's never been your marinade. So why try to change and morph into that now? It's like, all right, let me
Mm.
take that. And so for 1 week, I literally scripted out what it was I wanted. I wanted to highlight my shoes, something that gives me joy, something that is different, right? I have peers that love to fish, love to golf, and so they would have that in the background. I have some that I worked with that have fantastic backgrounds of their kitchen or their patio settings, and I wanted to show something different. So I highlighted the shoes. I highlighted the fundamentals from a mindset perspective. I have other little trinkets that are on my wall, like Michael Jordan from the free throw line in a dunk contest. I have black and white photography that's around my house as well. And so essentially that's how it came about, Chris, was just taking what was unique to me, to your point, and tapping into that authenticity and then allowing it to shine and being okay with whatever the results were from such.
Mm. I so love that, Vinaya. And here's what strikes a particular chord with me is how intentional you were with it. That you literally sat down and thought, what can I do to level up? What can
Yes.
I do to not only improve my game, but make my working situation, make my surroundings better, more productive, and feel more like my own. I mean, the more intentional we are with, I think, with everything, the more satisfied we're going to be. But it's such, and by the way, you've inspired me. It makes me want to think through, well, if I could put 4 words on my board,
Yeah.
what are the
What would it
four
be?
words that I would put on my board? It's got me thinking. And anybody out there listening, what are the 4 words that you'd put on your board?
Yeah.
I love mindset, hustle, success, greatness. That's fabulous. All right. With your permission, I'm going to
Yes.
zoom back in just for a moment. This way I've got a better look at you, as does the audience. Um, do you mind talking a little bit about your career
Yeah.
progression? One of the things I love to ask my guests, and by the way, folks, we don't see you out there. We never know who's out there with us live. So if you do care to say hello, please feel free to do so. If you have any questions for Vinaya or myself, please feel free to ask. I always love hearing people's journey into pre-sales. Yours was particularly interesting. You shared a little bit when we had dinner. You stumbled into pre-sales very early in your career, and you were sort of a rocket ship towards leadership. Do you mind sharing that a little bit?
Yeah, no problem at all. So, for those out there in the audience, as to Chris's point, please chime in. I love the interactiveness that you have set up here. So, as I mentioned before, 17 years, Chris, coming up in August. 17.
Amazing. That's
Um,
amazing.
being able to navigate during difficult times, right? Being able to maneuver via difficult times, being able to overcome difficult times is probably a notion that's a part of my brand. And as I said before, the word that's above me, legacy, is definitely going to be a part of that. But 17 years is crazy to say, but it's also fulfilling to say when you're having fun, when you're being challenged, and most importantly for me, as you noted, when I am able to be of service to others. That's why I got
Mm.
into leadership in the first place. But I'll take a step back and talk to you about my journey. So I'm a military brat. Both my parents were in the military. Bless their hearts. They're now retired master sergeants from the Air Force. And so, shout out to all those, and I appreciate your service for those that are in the military or have retired from such. I graduated from North Carolina A&T in 2008. So, shout out to all of those HBCU goers, alumni, and Aggie pride to all my Aggies that are out there. I graduated in 2008 during a very, very interesting time period, right? It was an interesting time period in society. It was an interesting time period politically. It was an interesting time period economically, right?
Mm.
But going into 2008, the only thing that I had top of my mind was landing a job, making money, and being successful.
And
That
buying
that was it.
shoes.
That and buying shoes, right? That was it. But let me take a step back for all those to remember what 2008 was. It also was a year that we were entering into a recession. and
Yeah.
a recession that for the first time, multiple generations that were living at that period of time were actually able to not see in real life, understand in real life, process it in real life, and live it in real time. We're
Mm.
not talking about, 1929 when the Great Depression happened and the things that we were learning about in history books. This was happening in real life.
We were living it. Yeah.
We were living it. For somebody that had the notion and it was brought up thinking 4 maybe 5 years college, get a job, go out there and be successful, things just quickly changed in less than 6 months.
Mm.
In the process of my journey changing in 6 months, society was changing. There was a
Mm.
big stock market crash that led into a bull run season. If you were able to capitalize on that, there was a housing crisis that was taking place. There was the financial banking crisis that was taking place.
Mm.
And then in the same respect, you flip the coin and the stock market's starting to go up. Technology is starting to move and change. I mean, the whole landscape was changing right before our eyes and so quickly and so drastically. I remember, and I was thinking about this conversation as I was gearing up for this. I was like, yeah, where was I mentally? Oh, yeah, that's right. Facebook was just into a couple of years of its infancy.
Gosh,
Twitter
so
was
crazy, right?
2 to 3 years at the launch of Twitter, which is now X. And then, oh yeah, for really dating myself, AWS was just becoming a thing.
Yeah.
Google Cloud hadn't even been announced yet,
Yeah.
right? So I was coming into a world, corporate America, if you will, and working workforce that was transitioning into this thing called the cloud. The cloud, the cloud, the cloud. What is this cloud thing, right? Cloud computing. What is all of that? And I think it's important because it references exactly what's happening again today. Instead of
Mm.
us talking about cloud, we're talking about AI,
AI.
AI,
Yeah.
AI. What is this
As
AI?
you were sharing, I found myself thinking people graduating now are facing something very, very
Exactly.
similar. Yep.
Exactly, right? So, I had 0 clues. 0
Mm.
clues as to navigating that, 0 clues as to what I was getting myself into. I just had the marinade to focus on what was given to me, control what is given to me, and just be successful in whatever that was. I got into the company I currently work for, Cisco, within our early in career associates program, which a lot of companies do have now, thankfully. And the big focus with that program was just getting you ready to go into tech sales, right? It was another year of college that I felt on steroids. And you are literally learning everything within 12 months, plus quote unquote some on the job experience, and then 12 months later, again, at that period of time, as you thought, you're going into the field.
Yeah.
Now, in the process of that, Chris, what then took place that last 6 months is unfortunately what also was taking place in a lot of companies, layoffs. And
Mm.
at that period of time, that was the first major layoff that transpired here. Now,
Mm.
come to find out, there was a lot of other companies that were doing huge layoffs as well, right? So you now have an injection of people coming out of college, recent college grads, that are coming into a world that's being completely flip-flopped upside and down. And what
Yeah.
do I do with that, right? From there, things start to stabilize. I did not take the traditional quote unquote path of going directly into the field or field sales engineering. What is known now today as virtual engineering was a guinea pig group of us doing that back then.
Interesting.
Yes. So when we talk about demonstrating and presenting and doing all these different activities and notions virtually, we were the guinea pig group. And we were told, "Make it work, and you can go wherever you wanna go from that." It's kinda like Willy Wonka ticket. Like, if you get the golden ticket, you're in the number, right? And so that's how I got into navigating into different parts of the company. So now you have that year underneath your belt. You have about 2 years of virtual engineering underneath your belt. And Chris, I still said, I don't want to go into the field just yet. I've now gotten exposure to different parts of this business. I want to continue to get exposure into that. So I did our demonstration route. I became a demonstration engineer, something that we now know today of being, but back then that wasn't a known entity. You were a part of a customer experience group, and customer experience not to what we know customer experience to being today, But customer experience back then was all about how is a customer experiencing this technology? How
Hmm.
is a customer becoming adaptive to this technology? How is a customer learning this technology? And so I had a demonstration kit and I would travel within the US, and I would go to different trade shows
Mm.
that were public sector, commercial, enterprise based, and just showing, demonstrating, and presenting the latest and greatest from a technology perspective,
Interesting.
right?
And,
So
and
now,
so,
sorry,
and,
go ahead.
and was it exclusively trade shows or was it sales opportunities as well?
It was both. So from
Yeah.
a flip side of the house, I had an office that I went into. I had a quote unquote demo circle that I was in, and I had customers that were being brought in by sales teams.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
either I was on site doing it physically, which at that period of time was Heard in Virginia, or I was on the road. And it was lovely. It was awesome. It was great, Chris, until it became not lovely, awesome, and great because no one teaches you about what it is to live life on the road
Tough.
and the mental and physical well-being and health that needs to go into that. Again, I
Yeah.
was in my 20s. I didn't think about any of that. Being successful, making some money, and buying some sneakers and gaining some experience. That's all I was
Yeah.
thinking about.
Yeah.
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 Um, so then I then transitioned into the field, and that's where the field then came into. So now I have about 6 years of being working in corporate America, and I have 6 years of understanding how the sausage is made behind closed doors, and I wanted to take that and populate that out. And I was fortunate and blessed with an opportunity to be able to support teams. I was living in Maryland still at to this day at this period of time, and supporting DC, Maryland, and Virginia customers. I was supporting Pennsylvania. I was supporting Delaware, and I was also supporting New Jersey. So now my brand is getting outside of just this DMV corridor, and now it's being populated to different beings. Again, that demonstration engineer thing really came into effect because now I'm able to take something that I know and love very well, and whether you're a customer of mine or not, I was able to use that with other people, but
Yeah.
doing it in a different way.
Yeah.
Just like we talked about with the background, for me, it was about personalizing it.
Hmm.
Chris, as a potential customer from a collaboration perspective, is having a bunch of these starting to come into his environment. Chris, as a customer, is starting to have a lot of different video enabled devices coming into his environment. Chris, as a customer, is starting to get multiple generations of people working at his company. I need to be able to allow Chris White to be able to be just as successful as Vinaya Springer coming in, but how Chris and Vinaya are learning is different. How Chris
Hmm.
and Vinaya are showing up is different. How Chris and Vinaya are going to have impact is going to be different, but Chris and Vinaya are going to be successful. That is the commonality that was there. And that then matriculated Chris into the journey of leadership. I've been in leadership now almost 10 years. So
Hmm.
a rather bigger portion of my time in industry has been as a leader, starting out as an early in career leader, front line to now a senior leader.
Yeah. It's really an amazing journey for someone to start with a technology company. And it sounds like you joined, in essence, their boot camp
Yes.
for pre-sales, field engineering. You did the virtual for a little while, you did the demo engineering for a little while, and you found out how rough life can be living out of a suitcase more than not. Then you went out into the field, and in doing so you had sort of a bigger patch of responsibility, if I can use that term, which
Yes.
meant you could leverage and spread your capabilities, your expertise in a wider patch. And then within about 7 years of starting, you moved into management, and now you've been in a management, you know, sequentially greater roles and responsibilities over a decade. To start your career with one company and stay there for 17 years, that alone is incredibly remarkable. Vinaya, I'm inspired to pause just for a moment because we did have a question from
Yeah.
Derek. Derek Boone, nice to see you, sir. Thank you for chiming in. Can you comment? This is a question for you, Vinaya. Can you comment on how your relationships with both internal team and external, I guess, end customers and partners, correlates with your positive business impact? Derek,
Yeah.
thank you so much for the question. Do you care to talk a little and go in whatever direction you care to go?
Yeah, no, and so I appreciate you, Derek. As always, my friend, great to hear from you. So Derek knows me well enough as well as a couple other people do. My leadership style is slightly different, and I am okay with that. I am empathetic, I am passionate, I am fiery, in some instances, but I am a people leader first, technologist second. And I always start by saying that because people leadership is all about connecting with people. So to Derek's first part of that question, your relationships both internally. That's my teams. I have to be able to connect with my teams. I have to be able to understand them. As I like to say, I have to meet people halfway. If I can understand what is motivating them and inspiring them, if I can understand what they're dealing with, right? We don't have to be best friends. We don't have to talk 24/7, but just enough information to know what makes them tick. What are their motivational factors? What are the gaps? A lot of people don't like to talk about their gaps. A lot of people don't like to talk about development areas. If I can know those things, then I can know how to use those things in order to get the best potential out of them and turn that into success. The same rules apply when I'm with customers, right? So, customers, I am a representation of my company as a leader, but I'm also a representation of people. Chris, you wrote a book that a lot of people don't even realize it was you that wrote this book in regards to 6 habits of a successful engineer. That book was something I read, Chris, when I was in CSAP.
Amazing.
That book gave me the fundamentals in regards to how to show up best for my for my customers. So if I marry building relationships with my teams and understanding and meeting people where they at with my teams, that is no different in regards to what I do with my customers.
Yeah.
When I go see and travel with my teams to see my customers, I look them in the face, I shake their hands, I ask them how they're doing. How's your day been? How if we've had a prior rapport, how are the kids doing? Me and you talked about, sneakers, and we talked about sports. That's typically some of the things that we'll talk about. And then from there, we then jump into business. Because as one of the habits that has mentioned, and you talk about this all the time, people buy from people. People do not buy from robots. They do not buy from sleazy quote unquote salespeople. People buy from people, regardless of how advanced technology is. That notion is not going to change. So if I take that and now mesh that together to answer Derek's question, that is how I correlate that back to positive business impact. Does that always mean we're going to get the deal? No. There is no guarantee that we're always going to get the deal. And even if we get the deal, it doesn't always mean that it's going to translate to a positive outcome long term as what is expected. But if I have that rapport, if I have that relationship, that allows for, at one point in time, what probably could have been an uncomfortable conversation with a customer to become comfortable. Vinaya, you know me very well. Chris, I know you very well. Use you as a customer example. I know you very well. Look, man, I apologize. I will fall on the sword for what has happened in regards to this technology breaking down. Me and my team are not going to sit here and promise that we're going to be able to correct the sins of our past, but we can focus on the here and now and how we can move the ball forward. So if you help me to help you in regards to understanding the pain points, I can escalate and do my best job internally in order to fix this. So hopefully, Derek, that answers the question, but I wanted to break it down in that fashion because it's an important concept to understand that people buy from people, regardless of how intelligent you are, regardless of the certifications that you have. If you are not able to emotionally connect with people at a high level, good luck in regards to being successful in the tech sales industry.
You literally read my mind because as you were speaking before you said what you said, I was thinking to myself, yeah, people buy from people. And that's precisely what you're saying. And with the focus on the internal team, people want to follow people and be led by people. And one of the things that I feel like really came through in the words that you were sharing, and you didn't say this specifically, but here's what I'm hearing and what I sense is that you really care about your people. And I think that's where it starts. And by the way, I think we also need to care about our customers and our prospects as people first. The more we can look at them as not just a dollar sign, not just an opportunity, but actual human beings, just like you and I. Many of them are working at home. They have things like shoes or cars or boats or, kids and pets and partners and spouses. The more we can think of those individuals as just that, people first, and then act accordingly. And I think people will sense that. And what I hear you saying is that that's how you treat your team as well.
That is how I treat my team, right? I don't look at anybody as different, regardless of their age, their ethnicity, their background, their race, their culture. I look at you as a person first, because at one point in time, I had a really great leader that did that for me. And she saw the best in me and was able to pull the best out of me because she wanted to hear my story. She wanted to understand my
Love that.
experiences, and she wanted to then be able to take that and help me to then turn that into being successful in the 9 to 5, right?
Mm.
So caring, regardless of how you label it, is extremely important. I can't overlook that when I am looking at leadership. You just can't, right? I think that, as we look at it from a generational perspective, even, um, the younger generation behind me, they care even more, right? They care that you see me, you hear me, and you value me as a person. They care about culture. They care about how that's going to impact where we're going with our broader mission and focus around inclusivity, right? They care about those things. The other part that I believe that comes with this is that as I look at those that are tenured and seniored and older than me, they care as well. It just translates differently. So care is different in regards to how it translates,
Really
but
good.
care, the definition does not change regardless of who you are and how you show up.
Yeah, really, really well said. By the way, I just need to say a quick hello to my good friend Chris
Hey.
Mabry. Chris, how are you, sir? Good to see you. Thanks for your comment. Chris now, of course, runs the pre-sales team with Reprise. Vinay, I wanna click a little bit deeper into
Yep.
this idea of the different generations, the multiple generations. And you're right, as you were speaking, you mentioned like the older generations, we care, but maybe we demonstrate or manifest, if I can use that term,
Yes.
that care in different ways. When you and I were speaking, one of the things that you said to me that just struck such a chord with me, and I'm going to just be very direct. This was the conversation that we had. You looked at me, and I'm 57. I think you're 40. Am I correct in saying that? And
Yep.
I appreciate you being so open about that. So I've got 17 years on you. You looked at me and you said, "Well, Chris, we're wondering if you and your generation are ever going to retire, and we're wondering if the generation behind us or two behind us are ever going to grow up." So we're sort of stuck here in the middle. Now, look, that was after maybe a glass of wine or two. So we were being very open and transparent at that point. But when you said that, it really struck a chord with me, and I thought, there were probably some aspects of other generations that I don't understand, and probably people in my generation maybe don't understand as well as we should. So I would love for you to just talk a little bit, speaking as a millennial.
Yeah.
What are some of the things? Let's start with my generation. What are some of the things that you think my generation, and I'll put myself in I think technically I'm a Gen Xer. I'm probably borderline between Gen X and baby boomer, but I think I'm just young enough to be Gen X on the higher side. What are some things that maybe the older generations need to better understand and appreciate about millennials that would help us communicate and collaborate better?
Yeah, no, it's a great way to drum up the question. So, and Chris is being so polite about it because The conversation, I think, was very interesting, right? The way that Chris set up the dinner itself and had just different people from different backgrounds, different companies. It was something that I really walked away like this is wow, right? I have never been at a dinner, networking dinner with people who I just met that night and walked away feeling fulfilled and learned something and had a really great conversation, right? So
And
that
by the way, we need to give credit where credit is due. So
yes,
it was the gentleman Chris Mabry who we just said hello to, who sponsored, and Reprise, who sponsored the whole dinner. So by the way, if you have a chance to go to one of the
do
dinners
it.
sponsored by Chris and Reprise, please do so.
Yes,
They're great events. So
yes.
kudos to Chris and Reprise. Carry on.
Yes. So no, so it was interesting because I was sitting across from another gentleman and we were just talking, having conversation in regards to his background, his story and where he is. And I was like, wow. Well, at that period of time I was 39, which was in February, and I said that's my exact same journey, right? And what was different was his organization is a bit smaller, right? My organization is a bit bigger. He was then starting to ask me certain questions in regards to, well, how do you deal with this and how do you deal with that, right? And I remember, Chris, you took interest in the conversation because you didn't instantly jump in and just give your perspective.
Hmm.
You did something that was different that I don't really foresee at times your peers doing, right? Just sitting and listening, right?
Hmm.
Um, the first thing that I would probably say is the communication and effective communicating. And effective communicating starts with listening. I have learned that if I truly am hitting or marching or getting my people to go in the right direction, I'm hearing correctly what's coming from among high and translating that down low. And if I'm not, then I need to go back to be able to re-swizzle and understand that a bit better, right? So first part is effective communicating with each other is listening.
Hmm.
Listening not to just hear, but listening most importantly to understand. And that's
Amen.
what you did. You initially you turned and you looked and you just listened and you just listened. And then, I said, so Chris, what are your thoughts? Right. And the first thing that you said was, this is interesting because I didn't even think about it from neither one of your perspectives.
Hmm. I
Right.
hadn't. Yeah.
You hadn't, right? So that's the second part. Listening first, second is building a perspective.
Hmm.
And as a leader that is in a position right now that is leading multi generations, my first job is to listen. My second job is to build a perspective. Irregardless if I agree, irregardless if I think you're right or you're wrong, I need to build a perspective on why you think the way you do and why you're operating the way they are and why you're showing up how you are.
Hmm.
And I feel as though sometimes there's a disconnect, right? Just like we talked about the word care. We
Hmm.
both care. It just shows and demonstrate it differently. We're both trying to build a perspective, hopefully. We're just building that perspective differently. In some instances, it may be building perspective and comparing it to what you've gone through, Chris, and saying, okay, well, yes, that's you're spot on or you're not. In other instances, for me, because I represent that messy middle right now from a multi-generational workforce perspective,
Hmm.
um, I'm developing and listening to both sides of the house. So
So interesting.
my perspective isn't just Vinaya the millennial. My perspective typically comes with Vinaya, the leader that is representing multiple generations and trying to be able to figure out how to find that silver line in between to get everybody to move forward. So
Hmm.
that's the upward motion of it, right? But that does not alienate or disregard or let them off the hook the ones that are below either.
Right.
Because as you mentioned, um, growing up, I'll say I would some maturity, right? The professional maturity, and I say that very loosely because we all were in those shoes at one period of time.
Hmm.
Irregardless if you had parents that worked in corporate America, irregardless if you had siblings that worked in corporate America, or irregardless if you had a mentor or sponsor that worked in corporate America in particular, um, there is a need for professional maturity. And professional maturity in today's world looks a lot different than what it did for me, right? We talked about virtual engineering as one aspect of it. Virtual engineering is a thing now, right? Working from home is a thing now. How do you show up on video? How are you presenting yourself on video? How are you
Mm,
articulating yourself on video? Are you showing up on time? Are you giving attention and focus? Are
mm,
you listening? Are you hearing? Am I responding back in a way to be able to just hear to be hearing you and then get off the call? Or am I really trying to gain a perspective? So it's a two-way street in regards to listening, communicating effectively, and building that perspective. But that's kind of how I look at it, right? I unfortunately, I don't get the opportunity to really think about myself and that whole totality of it, right? As a millennial, we are asked to be able to continue to move the ball forward while bringing others along, and we're also in this waiting period, right? And I remember us talking about this at the table, this holding pattern to kind of see what's going to happen next. And a
mm,
holding pattern, ironically enough, and I'll pause here, Chris, that came about because of the pandemic. Because if you
mm,
think about it, before the pandemic, people were retiring at a certain age. People were moving off and doing different things. So my generation, you have a lot of people now, a lot of my peers that are entrepreneurs. They work for themselves. They have taken what they have gained in knowledge and experience from corporate America or wherever they may be, and taking that and applying it in a different route. Because I still want to be successful. I still have shoes to buy, right? And I still want to be able to grow while I have time left. And
yeah,
that doesn't necessarily translate to staying in the same job for XYZ amount of years as those that are above us.
yeah. Uh, First of all, I just so appreciate hearing you speak just authentically and openly, and just like when we spent a few hours together at Chris's dinner event. I just find myself having so many thoughts and observations as you speak. You use the word the messy middle. It's interesting. I'm just being very transparent. I've never thought of the millennial generation as quote that messy middle, but I can see where it might feel that way for many people in that generation, because as you've said, there are a number of people probably roughly my age, again, I'm so somewhere between maybe 50 and 60, 47 and 60, something like that, who probably are in many of those more senior roles and may not have plans to retire for
Yeah.
5 to 10 or 15 years, and for better or for worse, right? But you are no longer the 20, you're no longer the kid. You're no longer the kids, right? You're no longer the youngsters, right? And so you're trying to bring them up, and you're right. It's just it's an interesting place to be, and I always appreciate when people sort of help me see things that are right in front of me, but for whatever reason I don't see them. So that's really an eye opener for me. Another thing that you said, which really strikes a chord with me, and maybe this is part of the generational conversation, is this idea of, I think you use the term sort of the business culture is just so different, right? And I do think it started from work from home, and I wonder, for example, I feel uncomfortable getting on video in any context, business wise,
Yeah.
without a collared shirt. And
Yeah.
even what I'm wearing now feels almost borderline too casual. And God help me if I were to like try to really relax and open up a button. You know what I mean? Like, and so many people laugh at me because I'm that. Whereas I get on calls all the time and people are wearing hoodies, t-shirts, whatever. I mean, it's just a very
Yeah.
natural conversation. By the way, Vinay, I just need to pause just for a moment. Derek Marino, nice to hear from you, sir. So Derek and I were SEs together back, speaking of generations, this feels like a generation ago, back in the early 2000s. He and I
Okay.
were
Nice.
colleagues. How about that? Over 20 years
Nice.
ago, he and I were
Nice.
colleagues. It's really, really good to hear from you, Derek. I hope you're doing well. Um, I'm curious to get your perspective on this because here's my hunch. My hunch is that anybody who's, I don't know, maybe your age and younger, who hears me saying something like, I'm uncomfortable not having at least they're probably thinking to themselves, for crying out loud, dude, lighten up. Like what's with you and your collared shirts, right? So so what do you think? Where should we be where this is concerned? Like, should we just not care? Should we just not care and just wear t-shirts or whatever?
Yeah. So as a leader, I accept anybody, right? I accept anybody for what it, and that's the part of leading multi-generations. Accept a person, meet them where they are, and just be able to be okay with it, right? Personally, I don't care. I had to be completely honest with you. And this was a notion that I saw with my generation coming into corporate America. Again, if you think back to what we were talking about when we first started,
Yeah,
I
oh
told
eight.
you
I mean,
about
come on.
'08, right? And back then, the whole notion was everybody wanted to show up to work in a hoodie and a t-shirt like Zuck, right? He was the first CEO
Right.
that was on a national stage in a t-shirt, sweats, I mean not sweats, a hoodie, jeans and sneakers. I mean, let's even go further into the sneaker aspect of it. He, ironically enough, was the one that really kind of started this change. Now, granted, this probably was a wave that was already happening in Silicon Valley. So I don't want to take away from the fact that from a culture perspective, this was probably already something that was there. But from a national global perspective, you never really saw that. So there was a je ne sais quoi, if you will, of regards to what it was to be quote unquote business professional and how you showed up.
Mm.
And I remember the first time walking on campus when I graduated, and I had a T-shirt on and some jeans, and I didn't. It was kind of like Chris. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I didn't know if
Yeah.
I fit in. I didn't know. And then you walk into the office, and I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and there was a lot of people that kind of had the same outfit on. I was like, oh, I found my people. I found my tribe. But my people and tribe, interesting enough, it didn't change when you're looking at it from a sales perspective, right?
Mm.
So I do think the dynamics of business professional do depend on the scenario itself.
Yeah.
I out there in the audience, I will never tell you to go on, I will never go on record and say to show up with a CEO meeting in a hoodie and t-shirt and jeans unless that is what that actual person is wearing and it is encouraged. But that is the notion of it. So for me, Chris, you look lovely, sir. I think as long as you are comfortable in what you're wearing. What you see with me right now is I have a t-shirt on and I have a blazer.
I love.
Probably when I
By the
when I
way, that's I now I've done that a time or two, but it's hard. It's almost hard for me to go there. But
yeah.
I've experimented with that a time or two.
Yeah, and I encourage my teams, man. It's the one thing that I love is less about the poking and more about how can we evolve as a culture.
Mm.
Because here's the gist of it. It has nothing to do with how you quote unquote show up in your clothes. It has everything to do with this and how you're using this to be able to translate out.
Mm.
And that for the last 17 years of being in the industry is all I really cared about. How are you using what has been given to you in your brain and translating
Mm.
that out? It doesn't you're no different to me if you have a collared shirt on, a blazer, or a t-shirt. I can have three individuals that show up three different ways. And depending on how the conversation goes, that's the person I'm 9 times out of 10 going to navigate towards too. And
Yeah.
what happens is, from a business casual, business professional perspective, you can say, okay, well, Vinaya, that gets me in the door of the blazer, right? Maybe it's a t-shirt, but I have a blazer on, etc. That still doesn't change the whole notion of what needs to happen during that call.
Mm.
It doesn't change what needs to happen at that bit in that meeting. You still need to have an impact. So if I go back to what Derek asked early on around customers and correlates your positive business impact, that's another aspect of it. How you
Mm.
show up, but how you authentically show up and are using the authenticity. So when I
Mm.
show up, either A, I may have jeans on, a t-shirt, blazer, etc., and I may have some sneakers on, And in the same respect, it might be a CXO leaving meeting where I'm showing up a little differently. But what all matters at the end of the day, Chris, is the brain power that I have and how I'm translating that out. I
Mm.
don't care about if Chris is having a button-up t-shirt on or a button-up, sweatshirt on or a hoodie. I care about your impact and all that comes out your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting. But by the way, Derek said, great conversation, Derek. That's just so good to see you. I appreciate that. I'm enjoying this too. To be honest, I just love hearing your perspectives,
Yeah.
Vinaya. Yeah, it's really got me thinking. The other thought that came to mind for me is how important is consistency, right? In other words, because people are used to seeing me in a collared shirt, if I were to show up for a meeting or even for one of these, God
Yeah.
help me if I ever show up for one of these conversations in a
That's your
t-shirt. I
challenge
don't
next,
even know what I'd
Chris.
do it myself.
That's your
But
challenge next.
would people see that and think to themselves, is there something wrong, or is there something different, or you know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
know. Or is this just a hang up of my own, and I'm just I'm putting way more into this than, and I mean, look, I mean, this. I basically speak on stages for a living. I mean, this is
Yep.
what I do. And to this day, I'm uncomfortable going on stage without, usually it's a suit and a
Mhm.
nice shirt. And I haven't worn a tie in a long time, but usually it's a suit, and a dress shirt. Sometimes I go with slacks and a blazer, but that's like,
Yeah.
but if I'm fully honest with myself, I'd rather not.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not particularly comfortable. It's what I feel like I should be doing. So in any event, but maybe this is to the conversation that we're having. Maybe this is a direct example of the gaps between the generations, and the fact that people, my age and, ish, are still hung up on the attire and the appearance, and the younger generations are like, we don't care. In fact, we'd rather see you in jeans and a t-shirt. Just be more yourself,
Just be
but
yourself. Yeah.
deliver what you have to say. So,
Yeah.
Vinay,
But
it's
what
just
I will say, Chris, real quick on that is that both sides of the coin are equally important. And
mm,
that's the gist of this. Um, if
that's
these types of conversations are not happening, then we'll never really know how we can evolve as a culture, how we can evolve as society, how we can evolve in from a tech lens, right? Um, how can I help you to be comfortable? And how can you help me to be comfortable? That
mm,
requires us to be able to have effective communication again, build a perspective, and just try to get an understanding of why you operate the way you do, right? Why is it so important to Chris of how he shows up? Because maybe there's something in there that I'm missing. And that's the part where, when I think about the professional maturity that then now comes from downstream, upstream that's needed, it's not your way or the highway. It's not this or I'm out, right?
mm,
This is all about building a perspective in regards to how we can build a strong nucleus and move forward. So I appreciate the Chris that shows up in this example with the t-shirt. It's the same way I appreciate Chris that shows up in a blazer. And both what Chris in a blazer and Chris in a t-shirt are doing is just giving me a different perspective of how they can both still be successful at the job that they were hired to do.
love that. Well, and something you said there really struck a chord, and that is, and it's so obvious when I hear myself say this, but it's so important to be said, and that is the communication, is sitting down and understanding the other person's perspective, and creating that safe space for people
Yes.
to be heard, and
Yes.
and feel heard and understood. Like you said, whether I agree or not is not relevant, at least momentarily,
Mhm.
till I at least give you the opportunity to feel heard and understood.
Exactly.
And to me, that's the foundation of really bridging this generational gap, I think.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
Vinaya, I'm gonna interrupt our conversation just for a moment. Believe it or not, it's been almost an hour. You and I have been talking. So and I feel like an hour is not clearly enough for you and I. So I'm gonna, if you're open to it, I may have to invite you to come
Please
back
do.
and have another conversation. So at this point, I think the landing gear has just come out. And
Okay.
the runway is in sight, and we're going to
Okay.
have to land this plane here in just a few minutes. We've talked about so many fun and I think important things. We've got just a few more minutes. Vinaya, in thinking about today's conversation,
Yeah.
was there one thing in particular you were hoping you would have the chance to share? And if so, have you had a chance to share that? And if not, what might that be?
Yeah, no, I first and foremost, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Chris, right? I love what you're doing. I love the exposure that's coming from it. I love just the different ideas, right? I've listened in, as I mentioned to you before, in some of your prior sessions and was able to take away so many different things. So I first and foremost want to say thank you for creating this opportunity and a safe space for these types of conversations. But to answer your question, I do think has come across, right? When we think about it from a multi-generational workforce and realizing that right now there's roughly 4 to 5 different generations operating in a workforce today, for us, in order to be able to be successful with the fast change, fast moving, yet again, society that we're living in because of AI and the different creations that are coming from such, it is important for us to take time out to have these types of conversations.
Hmm.
It is so important for us to build a perspective, not to just hear to hear, but to actually listen and to
Hmm.
be able to take away 1 or 2 things that I can learn from Vinaya, from Chris, and from anybody else that I might have these conversations with in order to have a better perspective on how to move forward. That's it. There's no rocket science, there's no chat GPT prompt that you can put in regards to how to be successful in today's society. If
Hmm.
you don't have the basic skill sets that it didn't take me to be in electrical engineering to be able to get, then you're not going to be successful because that's the foundation. On top of that foundation, then you can layer in the different skill sets that may be required for your 9 to 5. But if the foundation is not there, Chris, then we're going to continue to be stuck in this this hamster wheel that we've been in, where there's just going to be another generation that's going to come behind Vinaya that's going to feel like the messy middle. And
Hmm.
that's the reality. We have the opportunity to break the monotony by doing the simple things like just sitting down and having conversations.
Hmm. I mean, I could not agree more. And look, if we and I steer away from politics, even though I live in Washington D.C. It's hard not to, as you do as well. But there's probably not enough people sincerely trying to listen to other people's perspectives globally. So I think as a key takeaway, I think that's great. And look, I think it's one of the reasons why I like doing this show and having these conversations, because I can assure you the person who's listening the most closely during these conversations is me. I know I've always got something to learn. Vinaya, you've been such a delight. Thank you so much for being here. Folks, and Vinaya, fair to say that anybody who either caught this live or catches the recording, you'd welcome them to connect
I
on
would.
LinkedIn?
I would. Please reach out. Do not hesitate.
Fabulous. Folks, if you were here for the live conversation, thank you so much for being here. If this is your first time catching one of these conversations, you can follow hashtag Tech Sales Advice to be alerted. And of course, go to techsalesmastery.com to learn more about what we do. I'm going to invite you to connect with Vinaya. She's as real as it gets. Vinaya, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to invite you to hang around backstage
Yeah.
just for a minute so we
No
can say a
problem.
few parting words. Otherwise, folks, I don't think I have a session scheduled for next week, but I'm sure I'll be back here in the next couple of weeks with another one of these conversations. Till then, we'll see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Bye.
Bye, all.